Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we finally have from Alex Warren, "You'll Be Alright, Kid." Alright, let's be real, nobody was really expecting nor looking for this review, even though Alex Warren currently has the #1 song in the United States and has for months now. And I'll admit, a double album debut from Alex Warren, which is kind of a misnomer. He stapled his Chapter 1 version of this album from last year onto this with 10 more songs, some of which predate said Chapter 1, similar to what Teddy Swims has done. It didn't seem exactly like something that would be all that interesting to dissect. But then at Osheaga in Montreal last weekend, I saw him live with the sort of overcrowded mid-afternoon set that showcased a tension that comes with someone who is being primed for the biggest stage. Even if it was distinctly weird how little his deeper, throaty, singing voice didn't really match his stage presence. And that was enough to convince me I had to cover this in some form just to figure out what was going on. And this is an album where it'll be shockingly easy to be reductive and dismissive. Hosier for the basic bitches, stomp clap, wife guy normcore, the final stage of Christian rock's infiltration of the mainstream monogenre by way of Mumford & Sons. And while there is a grain of truth in all of that, the inclusion of the Chapter 1 songs, it forces a juxtaposition of where Alex Warren was to where he is right now, and there is some nuance in that contrast. Of course, the immediate make or break point throughout all of it is whether or not you buy into Alex Warren's sincerity, how he's parlayed his struggles and losing his parents and abuse and teenage homelessness to unlikely success, coming up through TikTok's hype house and then trying to perfectly configure what'll trigger the algorithm and not get him canceled. And the answer, it's a bit of a moving target, especially when you can tell how ham-fisted Warren can be as a singer-songwriter. Is his bluntness an asset and how directly he tugs at the heartstrings? Or is it coldly cynical to write basic music and cash in on a marketable sound and sympathy for the silent majority? Now, I could recycle the same statements I made when reviewing Ed Sheeran for years, especially when the gentle Catch My Breath is the most obvious Ed Sheeran riff I've heard in a while. Or I could spark up the age-old argument about authenticity, which gets even messier when you acknowledge the realities of, performance. Or if I really wanted to get into the ugly weeds of the music industry, I could talk about the trauma rollout, terminology that tends to get conveniently highlighted or ignored whenever we like or dislike the artist. To whom we give grace is always interesting and revealing, but look, so much of this ultimately swings back to execution and performance, where I don't think there's any consistent answer with Alex Warren. Sometimes his ragged holler strikes a chord and feels very lived in, even if the songs are screaming out for a little more detail around the occasional well-structured turn of phrase. Sometimes he's so embarrassingly clumsy that it kills any atmosphere that he's attempting, and sometimes you get a song in the middle, like First Time on Earth, where he's attempting to reconcile with his late mother's abusive alcoholism with some measure of forgiveness and maturity, and yet the framing of "it's your first time on Earth," it feels way too broad to land. A tighter gallop of Bloodline with Jelly Roll feels more present and lands as a huge highlight right after. And this is where the contrast between the discs is very telling. The old Chapter 1 songs tend to be more rootsy and warm with fast-picked acoustics and more familiar progressions, where his voice is more nestled into the multi-tracking and arguably sounds better, where the new tracks are more broadly orchestral. Dare I even say the makeover the industry is looking for the big primetime push, attempting to draw on soul or gospel with flashier strings and booming drums, horns, and especially the huge choirs. And you can tell he stumbles more in the latter category, especially whenever he mentions God, and it feels kind of lacking in punch or import. In fact, what becomes blindingly obvious across both discs is this paralyzing insecurity and fear that comes from the loss of family and economic precarity in your past. Once you get out, you're terrified of going back. And given how much bigger Warren's audience has gotten, that metatextual insecurity becomes outright text on Getaway Car nakedly borrowing from Hosier by way of One Republic that forgot to give the guitar or bass any muscle, but especially Who I Am, where he describes himself as a shapeshifter on the first verse, where he will be anything you want him to be so long as you will love him. We're following that with the flagrant Aloe Black riff, "You Can't Stop This," isn't remotely convincing. In that way, it's honestly a bit reminiscent of early Drake, but with Alex Warren having the benefit of a settled relationship with a woman that he dearly loves. Most of those songs are largely kind of bland, of which I'll grudgingly slip onto my own wedding playlist for folks to slow dance when I'm in a different room. But the better words are competently functional, albeit probably more self-serious and dour than can be convincingly sold without a little bit more intricate detail in the writing or meatier production. Or in the case of Everything, a really clingy piano ballad that feels cloying in the extreme. And yet, I can still acknowledge when the formula does stick the landing. I already mentioned Bloodline, both here and on Billboard Breakdown, and Troubled Waters takes the moment of when Alex Warren told his now wife that he was homeless and he was pleading for her to stay, alongside the stomping Ryan Tedder-esque staccato pianos to materialize and anchor the stakes. And I can appreciate the Hosier imitation enough on Save You a Seat and trying to commemorate his parents. But a couple of the other songs where he reflects on an old relationship that went sour, like the desperate exodus of Burning Down, that weathers into the reflective Rose collab On My Mind, where again, they've got good chemistry. They offer some good contrast. And the closing title track, as he tries to exhale, it ends things off reasonably well, just a message to himself that he's gonna be okay. But to conclude, look, the larger indictment of Alex Warren is that he's caught between moments of genuine pain or angst that could make for a more raw experience, but he's also got a Workman-esque skill with structuring bombast and hooks and his team on production that the industry is going to viciously pigeonhole and wring dry for everything it's worth. And as of yet, the balancing act feels both precarious and kind of inconsistent. I'll say this is the sort of thing that he might improve with time. I remember how roughshod early Ed Sheeran was at Alex Warren's age in the early 2010s, but Ed Sheeran also got looser and weirder with a broader plethora of influences, to say nothing of the bluesy, horny edge that Hosier worked around his same age. And I don't know if Alex Warren's fear will prevent him from that exploration. Now, in his own lane, I think there is some promise still. I'd certainly prefer him stay closer to folk or rock than the treacly pop soul, the latter place where the absence of good argument has more runway. But over the bloated combined runtime, I just hear more glimmers and awkward tension than fully landing. I think it's worth hearing once to catch all the moments, but I would just stick with those moments. And as for Warren, if you can drill into the alchemy, push his sound, he might just be alright, and that might be good enough. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Again, I'm still trying to get the whole setup working. It'll be a bit of work in progress for the next little while. Again, still in the process of moving in here, but hey, I like a lot of what I'm seeing so far. And yeah, I wasn't planning on talking about Alex Warren, but he's been lingering on my mind since Osheaga, and I did want to fully explore that. I'm not going to do an actual full-length festival review for Osheaga. It was for my bachelor party, and I promised all my friends and family that I wouldn't work on it, so again, you might get certain elements piecemeal along the way. Although, top 3 acts at Osheaga, Killers, Olivia Rodrigo, Lucy Dacus, and I'll throw in Shabuzi and Marina for a top 5, I guess. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you all want to get involved in helping support the channel, get albums onto my schedule, or just yell at me on my Discord, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships is right over there. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.